All right, so today we're diving deep into a problem that's uh, costing businesses trillions of dollars globally.
Trillions with a T.
And it might surprise you to learn it all comes down to contracts. Imagine this. You're a high-level executive at a Fortune 500 company,
Okay.
and one morning you get a call that sends chills down your spine. You're facing massive fines, potentially millions, because your company missed a critical contract renewal deadline. Turns out no one was really owning the contract.
Right.
Everyone thought someone else was handling it, and boom, disaster strikes.
That scenario might sound extreme, but it illustrates a point Tyja Dickerson makes powerfully in her book 10x Contract Value.
It does.
And believe it or not, these kinds of situations are way more common than you might think.
Yeah, it's interesting because we were just talking before we hit record about how it does seem so simple, right? Like contracts, just make sure someone's paying attention to the dates. But it's clearly a lot more complicated than that. So that's what we're unpacking today. Chapter 1, No One Owns the Contract and Why. We'll be using real-world examples to bring this to life. Because let's be honest, contracts aren't exactly known for being thrilling.
Right.
But trust me, this stuff is important.
It really is. Dickerson drops a fascinating fact early on. The World Commerce and Contracting estimates that poor contracting practices cost companies a staggering 9% of their annual revenue. We're talking trillions of dollars lost each year just vanishing because of inefficiencies and oversights related to contracts.
Trillions. Wow. That's mind-blowing.
Okay.
I'm definitely hooked now. So help me understand this. How does this dispersed responsibility even happen? It's not like companies set out to lose money on contracts.
Right, and that's part of the problem. It's often a slow burn, not a sudden explosion. Think about the life cycle of a contract. Legal reviews, it was tealing. Procurement negotiates terms. Sales might make promises to clients. Finance needs to be aware of payment schedules. IT might be involved if there's software integration.
Okay, so lots of different departments are touching these contracts, each focused on their specific piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. But as Dickerson points out, rarely does anyone have a truly comprehensive view of the contract from start to finish. And that's where the cracks begin to show.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, in my own work, sometimes I sign a contract and I don't even read the whole thing.
It happens.
And I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
So let's say procurement is laser focused on getting the lowest price from a supplier, but they don't fully grasp the legal implications of the terms they're agreeing to.
That's a perfect example. Or you might have a sales team eager to close a deal, making promises that the contract doesn't actually support. This disconnect can lead to all sorts of problems down the line.
Okay, so we have this dispersed responsibility. No one truly owning the contract. What are the real-world consequences? What are the risks for companies? And honestly, what should I, as someone involved in contracts, be worried about?
The risks are significant, and they fall into a few categories. First, you have compliance risks, missed deadlines, unfulfilled obligations. These can lead to huge fines, especially in highly regulated industries. Dickerson cites a case where a multinational corporation lost millions because they didn't properly track their contractual obligations.
Ouch. So not only are you missing out on potential benefits, you could be setting yourself up for some serious legal trouble.
Exactly. And then there are operational inefficiencies. Think duplicated effort delays in projects, people working at cross purposes because they don't have a unified understanding of the contract. Everyone's job becomes harder and it slows down the entire organization.
I'm picturing it like a game of telephone where the message gets distorted as it passes from person to person.
Yeah,
By the end, no one's quite sure what the original agreement was.
that's a great analogy. And then there are the lost opportunities. Dickerson points out that contracts often have hidden value. Discounts, penalty clauses, options for renewal that go completely unnoticed because no one's looking at the big picture.
So you might be leaving money on the table because you don't even realize what's buried in the fine print of your existing contracts. That's a real wake-up call.
It is. And this brings us to Dickerson's central argument. To overcome these risks and unlock the true value of contracts, companies need to move towards a more centralized approach to contract management.
Okay, that makes sense intuitively. But what does centralization actually look like in practice?
It's more than just creating a shared folder and hoping for the best. Dickerson emphasizes that you need a clear strategy buy-in from all departments, and potentially even expertise from those who specialize in this kind of transition. She uses the example of a manufacturing firm that tried to centralize but only focused on new contracts. They ended up with a fragmented system and continued to experience many of the same problems.
So it sounds like a half-hearted attempt at centralization can actually make things worse. What about a success story? Does Dickerson highlight any companies that got this right?
She does. She talks about a global manufacturing company that implemented a centralized system, and the results were impressive. They saw a huge improvement in compliance and were able to make better decisions because they had a single source of truth for their contract data.
Interesting. So it's not just about avoiding disaster. It's about making smarter, more strategic decisions.
Exactly. And having that centralized system, a single source of truth, is a critical first step. But Dickerson argues that it's just the beginning. There's so much more to uncover in terms of leveraging contract data to drive business value. But for now, let's stick with centralization. This idea of no one owning the contract. I'm really curious to hear more about the specific implications Dickerson highlights.
Yes, let's dig deeper into that. I have a feeling this is where things get really interesting.
You're right about that. Get ready to explore the hidden depths of your contracts.
All right, I am. I'm ready. Let's do it. Welcome back. We're deep in the trenches of Taija Dickerson's 10x contract value, specifically Chapter 1, where she really unpacks this whole no one owns the contract problem. Before we went to our little break there, we talked about the risks and the need for centralization. But I'm eager to explore those deeper implications you mentioned. Where does Dickerson go next?
She dives into the specific ways this dispersed ownership can really hurt a company. One of the most compelling points she makes is that it can actually cripple your ability to innovate and stay ahead of the curve.
Really? Explain that to me. I wouldn't immediately connect contracts to innovation.
Think about it this way. Every time your company enters into a new agreement, whether it's with a supplier, a partner, or even a new employee, you're essentially making a bet on the future. You're betting that this relationship will help you achieve your business goals. But if no one's really owning those contracts, if the knowledge and insights they contain are scattered and siloed,
You're basically flying blind, making decisions without a clear understanding of the commitments you've already made.
exactly, and that can seriously hinder your ability to pivot, adapt to new market conditions, or even seize new opportunities. Dickerson gives an example of a tech company that missed out on a lucrative partnership because they didn't have a clear picture of their existing intellectual property agreements. They were afraid of potential conflicts they couldn't even identify because the information was so fragmented.
Wow, that's a costly oversight. So it's not just about legal risks or financial losses, it's about limiting your company's strategic options.
Exactly, and that can be even more damaging in the long run. Dickerson argues that by centralizing contract ownership and creating a system where everyone can access and understand the commitments the company has made, you're essentially building a foundation for more informed, agile, and ultimately more innovative decision-making.
That's a really interesting perspective. It's about turning contracts from a reactive compliance-driven function into a proactive strategic asset.
Right, and this ties into another critical point. Dickerson makes the importance of aligning contracts with overall business goals. When no one owns the contract, it's easy for them to become disconnected from those goals.
I can see how that happens. Each department is focused on their own objectives, and the contract becomes just a means to an end, rather than an integral part of the overall strategy.
Exactly, and that can lead to all sorts of misalignments. For example, procurement might negotiate a contract that saves money in the short term, but creates logistical headaches for operations down the line. Or legal might insist on ironclad terms that scare away potential partners.
So you end up with a bunch of contracts that are technically sound, but don't actually support the company's broader objectives.
Exactly. Dickerson stresses that contracts should be viewed as living documents that need to be actively managed and aligned with evolving business needs. And to do that effectively, you need someone or a team who truly owns that process, who understands the big picture, and can ensure that every contract is working in service of the company's goals.
This all makes so much sense. It's not just about avoiding risk, it's about proactively using contracts to create value and drive business success.
Absolutely. And that's what 10x contract value is all about. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, Dickerson highlights some really practical implications of this no one owns the contract problem that I think are worth exploring. These are things that might resonate with anyone who's ever dealt with contracts, regardless of their role in the company.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the nitty-gritty details.
Well, one of the things she talks about is the impact on relationships. When no one feels truly responsible for a contract, it can lead to a lack of communication and follow-through, which can damage relationships with suppliers, partners, and even customers.
I can see how that would happen.
Yeah.
If a supplier feels like they're constantly having to chase down payments or clarify terms, because no one on your end has a clear grasp of the agreement, that's going to erode trust and goodwill pretty quickly.
Exactly, and it can make it much harder to negotiate favorable terms in the future. Dickerson gives the example of a company that had a great relationship with a key supplier. But things started to sour when the contract renewal process became a nightmare. There were delays, miscommunications, and ultimately the supplier felt like they weren't a priority. They ended up going with a competitor, and the company lost a valuable partnership.
Wow, that's a painful lesson.
Yeah.
So it's not just about internal inefficiencies. It can have a ripple effect
Yeah.
on your external relationships as well.
Absolutely. And this ties into another important point Dickerson makes, the impact on reputation. When a company has a reputation for being disorganized or unreliable when it comes to contracts, it can damage their credibility in the marketplace.
That makes sense. No one wants to do business with a company that's known for breaching contracts or dragging their feet on payments.
Exactly. And in today's hyper-connected world, news travels fast. One negative experience can quickly spread through social media and online reviews, potentially impacting your ability to attract new customers or partners.
So the stakes are even higher than we might initially realize. It's not just about the immediate consequences of a poorly managed contract. It's about the long-term impact on your company's reputation and its ability to thrive in the marketplace.
Exactly, and this is why Dickerson's message is so urgent. She's not just talking about making incremental improvements to contract management. She's calling for a fundamental shift in how we think about and approach contracts.
It's about moving beyond a transactional mindset to a more strategic and holistic approach.
Exactly, and this is where the idea of 10x contract value comes in. It's not just about doing things better, it's about doing things differently, about unlocking the hidden potential within your contracts to drive exponential growth and success. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. There's still so much more to uncover in Chapter 1.
You're right. Let's get back to the practical implications of this no one owns the contract dilemma. What else does Dickerson highlight?
Well, she delves into something that I think will resonate with anyone who's ever felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume and complexity of contracts. Information overload. When contracts are scattered across different systems and departments, it becomes incredibly difficult to get a clear picture of what you've committed to, what your obligations are, and even what opportunities might be hidden within those agreements.
It's like trying to piece together a puzzle without all the pieces. You might have a general idea of the image, but you're missing crucial details.
Exactly. And that can lead to analysis paralysis. You're so overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information that you end up doing nothing. Or you make decisions based on incomplete or inaccurate data. Dickerson gives the example of a company that was trying to negotiate a major contract with a new supplier. But they couldn't get a handle on their existing commitments with other suppliers. They were worried about potential conflicts or overlaps, but they didn't have a way to easily analyze and compare the terms of their various agreements.
So they were stuck in a holding pattern, unable to move forward, because they were drowning in contract data.
Exactly, and this is a common problem. Companies are collecting more and more contract data, but they're not necessarily getting any smarter about how they manage and utilize that data.
It's like having a library full of books, but no way to find the information you need.
That's a great analogy, and this is where Dickerson's message about centralization and data management becomes so crucial. By creating a system where all your contracts are accessible, organized, and easily searchable.
You're essentially creating a knowledge base that can empower you to make better, faster, and more informed decisions.
Exactly, and that's what we'll be exploring in more depth as we continue our deep dive into 10x contract value. But before we move on to the next chapter, there's one final point from Chapter 1 that I think is worth highlighting. It's something Dickerson calls the opportunity cost of dispersed contract ownership.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's the idea that when we're so focused on simply managing contracts, on getting them signed and filed away, we're missing out on the bigger picture. We're not thinking about how contracts can be leveraged to create value, to drive innovation, to build stronger relationships, and to achieve our strategic goals.
It's like we're so busy putting out fires that we don't have time to think about how to prevent them in the first place.
Exactly, and that's what Dickerson challenges us to do. She argues that we need to shift our mindset from viewing contracts as a necessary evil to seeing them as a strategic asset, as a source of competitive advantage.
And that's where the idea of 10x contract value comes in. It's about moving beyond basic contract management and embracing a more strategic and holistic approach.
Precisely, and we'll be exploring this in much greater detail as we continue our deep dive.
I'm ready to unlock that 10x potential. But before we move on, I think it's time to hear from our sponsor. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring Tyja Dickerson's 10x contract value. And you've painted a really vivid picture of this no one owns the contract problem. and it's wide-reaching implications. Before the break, you mentioned this concept of opportunity cost and how this kind of limited view of contracts keeps us stuck in this reactive mode.
Exactly. It's like we're so busy putting out fires that we forget to look for ways to prevent them in the first place. Dickerson argues that we need to shift from simply managing contracts to actively leveraging them as strategic assets.
Okay, that's a powerful idea. It's not just about avoiding risk, it's about proactively using contracts to create value.
Yeah.
What are some specific examples of how companies can make this shift?
Well, she talks about the importance of using contract data to gain insights into market trends, competitor behavior, and even your own operational strengths and weaknesses. Imagine you have 1,000 supplier contracts in a centralized system. You could analyze that data to identify which suppliers are consistently delivering on time and on budget, which ones are causing delays or cost overruns, and use that information to make more strategic sourcing decisions.
So instead of just checking boxes for compliance, you're actually using contract data to make your entire supply chain more efficient and effective.
Exactly, and it goes beyond procurement. You can use contract data to track performance metrics, identify areas for improvement, and even spot early warning signs of potential problems.
So give me an example. How would this work in, say, a sales context?
Okay, let's say you're a software company that licenses its product to businesses. By analyzing your contracts, you could identify which pricing models are most profitable, which features are most popular, and even which customer segments are most likely to churn. That information can then be used to refine your sales strategy, develop new product offerings, and ultimately drive revenue growth.
So it's like having a feedback loop built into your contracts, constantly providing you with data that can help you make smarter decisions. I'm starting to see how this can really unlock that 10x potential.
It's about moving beyond the transactional and embracing the strategic. But Dickerson doesn't just talk about the what, she also delves into the how. She provides practical guidance on how to make this shift, and a big part of that is technology.
Right, we've touched on AI and machine learning before in previous deep dives. Can you elaborate on how these technologies can be used to transform contract management?
Absolutely. Imagine having an AI tool that can scan all your contracts, extract key data points, and then organize that information into a dashboard where you can easily search, filter, and analyze it. You could quickly identify all contracts that are up for renewal in the next quarter, or all contracts that contain a specific clause related to data privacy.
That would save so much time and effort compared to manually searching through stacks of paper or scrolling through endless spreadsheets.
Exactly. And it goes beyond simple data extraction. AI can be used to analyze contract language, identify potential risks and opportunities, and even predict future outcomes.
So you could potentially use AI to flag contracts that are likely to result in disputes, or to identify clauses that are unfavorable to your company.
Exactly. It's like having a legal expert on call 24/7, helping you to mitigate risks and make more informed decisions. And the technology is advancing rapidly. We're already seeing AI tools that can draft contracts, negotiate terms, and even automate the entire contract lifecycle.
Wow, that's incredible. It sounds like we're on the verge of a major revolution in contract management. But I imagine there are also challenges in adopting these new technologies.
Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges is data quality. AI is only as good as the data it's trained on, so it's crucial to have clean, accurate, and standardized contract data. This means moving away from paper-based processes, implementing consistent naming conventions, and using templates and clause libraries whenever possible.
So it's not just about buying a fancy AI tool, it's about laying the groundwork for success by getting your data in order.
Exactly. And that requires a shift in mindset and a commitment from leadership. You need to create a culture where contract data is valued, where people understand its importance and are willing to invest the time and resources to manage it effectively.
Yeah, it sounds like this shift to 10x contract value is as much about people and processes as it is about technology.
Absolutely. It's about creating a holistic approach to contract management that spans the entire organization. And Dickerson provides practical guidance on how to do that. She talks about the importance of building cross-functional teams, establishing clear roles and responsibilities, and creating a communication plan to ensure that everyone is on the same page.
So it's about breaking down silos and creating a more collaborative and strategic approach to contract management.
Exactly. And the benefits of doing so are immense. Dickerson argues that by embracing 10x contract value, companies can reduce risk and improve compliance, unlock hidden value and drive revenue growth, strengthen relationships and enhance their reputation, gain a competitive advantage, and position themselves for long-term success.
Those are some pretty compelling outcomes.
Mhm.
I think anyone listening to this would agree that those are goals worth striving for.
Absolutely. And Dickerson's book provides a roadmap for achieving them. It's packed with practical advice, real world examples, and inspiring stories of companies that have successfully made the shift to 10x contract value.
Well, I'm definitely feeling inspired. This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. As we wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you would want our listeners to remember from 10x contract value?
I think the most important message is that contracts are not just legal documents, they are strategic assets that can be leveraged to create immense value for your business. By shifting your mindset, embracing technology, and building a culture of contract excellence, you can unlock that potential and transform your contracts. From a source of risk and frustration into a powerful engine for growth and innovation.
That's a powerful message, and I think it's one that will resonate with anyone who's ever felt the pain of a poorly managed contract or the frustration of missed opportunities.
Exactly. It's time to stop viewing contracts as a necessary evil and start seeing them for what they truly are, a source of strategic advantage and a key driver of business success.
Well said, I could agree more. If you're ready to embark on your own journey to 10x contract value, you can grab a copy of Tyja Dickerson's book on Amazon or Barnes& Noble. It's an essential read for anyone who wants to transform their approach to contracts and unlock the hidden potential within their agreements.